So that's why I just want to tell you, as we're starting, this is a drop in the bucket. If your subject interests you, you want to do more, you want sources, please email me. I'll be happy to send you. I figured I'll just leave this with Richard afterwards. Everything I say has the Gemara and the source, whether it's Bavli or Shalmi, so you can look it up. So that's not what it says. So I mean, you can look it up and check it out later and learn it more and so on. So the question really became is, why would somebody want to have a class about death when you're in the month of Adar? You know, it just sort of seems like Adar is supposed to be a time of like joy and increasing joy. Misha nichnas Adar marba b'simcha, which by the way is in the Gemara in Tainus, which is not necessarily the most joyful of Masechtas, but we'll leave that as a side point for a moment. So the question is, why would you want to be learning about death on this time and so on? And I actually sent out a poster which I heard was like scary to people, so I want to apologize. But it was a picture.
It was censored by the censoring board.
No, I appreciate that.
The committee.
That's okay. I call censoring board from Lushan sense. So they were using their good sense. But I at least explained to it. The whole reason I thought it was cool was not merely because I had a picture of the Grim Reaper, but because if you notice, there was a little skull in the back saying, yo, what? Say what? Meaning that this, I'm going to ruin the class and give you the bottom line now. The bottom line is, there's nothing to be afraid of in this world except God. And that's really worth being afraid of. And if you really fear God in the healthy, wholesome, most proper way, there is nothing that will bring a greater experience of life and can even supersede death. And this is why Gemara says that the tzaddikim are alive even after they die, and the Rishoyim are dead even while they are living. And a Rasha, by the way, is not about an evil person. A Rasha is about a person whose head is filled with rash, noise. And that tzaddik is not necessarily a saint, because we don't believe in saints. A tzaddik is just a human being who really gives it that extra little effort. Tzaddik is from the Lashon tzad kuf, to the side of holiness. King Solomon says that the tzaddik falls 7 times and gets up 8 times. What? You can imagine a rabbi falls once, bam, that's it. He's in cherem, he's out the door, and right, that's the end of it. Nobody gives anybody a second chance anymore these days. And yet, it says tzaddik falls. Why does it say a person falls? Why tzaddik? Because guess what? Hello? First time here on earth. This is what it means to be a tzaddik. Is a human being who fails. But he gets up, she gets up, and continues and tries and goes again and goes again. And then the idea of the 8th time is they break the 7th cycle. They then break into the infinite. And therefore, this idea of being able to obtain that is something we can all do. It's not something that only certain people were designated with this capability. And to think that it's only those kind of special people who can do that is a shame. Because if you think about this, at the moment that God created the world, right, let's go into pixel mode. So there's like, people say yesh mi'ayin actually means something from nothing, but it's not really correct, because it's the Ein Sof, which is so it's really that prior to creation was everythingness, and after creation became somethingness. So, but whatever it is, just imagine like a blank screen, and all of a sudden there's that first, I don't know how to do this like as a verb, but like God is like Godding, right? And then there had to be like a moment when God was Godding, that God was like, oh my me, right? And suddenly like came up with the idea of creation. So at that first pixel, that first thought of creation, everything that was ever going to be created was there at that moment as an imperative. Not as add-on, as an imperative. So that includes us. That means somehow, somewhere at that moment, God was deciding that this creation is Kedai, also decided you're Kedai. Not like, oh yeah, I got to throw in Richard as well just for a little flavor. No, it was absolutely about necessity. Complete necessity, that each of us are a vital necessity. I don't know if you can relate to this, but when I grew up in Long Island, there were like certain phases, like growing up in the 50s and the 60s in Long Island, and one of them was everybody had to build an extension on their house. So like, now there was, I could say, who can relate to that? There was the extension mode. For some reason, not only it wasn't enough to have a living room, you also had to have like a den. Nobody ever did anything in the den, but you had to have it. And
the living room. The living room was like
right,
yes.
Right. The living room, like they had to have the plastic furniture, and then you had the den table. And a lot of the families I grew up with decided that what they would do is the 10,000 piece puzzle. And you could benchmark your life on that puzzle. Because every time you would come in, you would see how it advanced. And of course, what happened was when you looked at that puzzle, your eye wouldn't notice, oh wow, look at that, they're up to 4,720. Your eye would go to that one piece in the middle that was missing. Right. Now they don't know that the dog ate it and find it. But that's where your eye goes. Well, think about this. Lahavdil, HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts a perfect world out there. And each one of us, right, if no two snowflakes are the same, Allah has kama v'kama, no two people are the same. And each one of us is that little shape. Well, if we're not being who we are, we're trying to be somebody else, it's not going to fit in the puzzle correctly. And that's like the first thing Hashem is like, where's Reuven? Where's Shimon? Where's Rivka? Right? I made them to be them. I don't need duplicates. I made them to be them. Where are they? And that becomes the freedom. And through this freedom of realizing that the inward traveling of self leads us to a door that makes us more powerful than even death. And that doesn't mean necessarily biological death, but it means eternal life, really what it's all about. It's really about scoring and getting there. And so the idea why Dafka now is because we have the war against Amalek. And Amalek is the opposite of the tzaddik. The Amalek is, as the Sfat Emet says, it is the Amul Kaf, the mischievous monkey. So the Kaf can on one hand mean monkey, like Kuf. The Kaf can also mean holy, Kadosh. So Bechira Chavshi, the free will is, at every moment in our lives, are we trying to tilt to the tzad, Kedusha, which is tzaddik, or are we giving up and simply being the mischievous monkey and losing what that opportunity is? And that becomes the struggle of Amalek, which we can and must eradicate, because through that eradication, we have the ability, like in this week's Parsha, to bring a world with no death. In fact, one of the Gemaras I quote here is Gemara Moed Katan. It says, it says like this. I'll just stumble on it when I come later because I thought I had it right here, but I don't see it. Okay. Anyhow, so the point is that like this. This is how it works. Even though the Lashon of Misha Nichnas is written as one word, I'm kind of taking a little liberty here. So I once heard this as a Chassidish drasha. Mi is Shem Hashem. Mi is Gematria 50, relating to the Nun Shari Bina, the 50th gate of wisdom. And me also, the Baal Shem says that the word me in Hebrew, not English, not WHO, but, WHO, not M-E that is, Mem Yud, means God. So when you say every Friday night, Eshes Chayil Mi Imtza, we know that it's Kodesh Baruch Hu who blesses us with our wonderful wives. So therefore, me, when HaKodesh Baruch Hu Nichnas enters into Adar. What is Adar? Adar is the Aleph comes to dwell. Dar is to dwell. When the Aleph comes to dwell, now what is the capability of Dar? Dar is, again, this week's Parsha, ironically, it is the Dalet of Echad and the Resh of Acher. It is the Echad of one and everything other, right? As Jews, we don't believe in left wing, right wing, because a bird can't fly without both wings. We believe in center and circumference. It's about what's really correct, and there's all of the distraction that goes with it. So therefore, when Adam and Eve blew it in the Garden of Eden, everything became chaos. One of the things that resulted was the birth or growth of the Dardar. And if you notice the word Dardar there is written without a Vav, as it's also by the word, by the Milchamat Amelech, although it's read as Dor, it's actually without, there's no Vav, so it could also be read as the Dardar. So it's the Amalek in our world that creates the confusion, which is the Dardar. And what is the Dardar? It's where the Dalet and the Resh are all mixed up. We no longer see clearly which is which, because Echad and Acher have the same first two letters of Aleph Chet, which is Ach, which is you could be bound. A person can be, God forbid, deeply drawn to Avodah Zorah, or Lahavdo, they can be free and use that same energy to be attached to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And that's where we stand in the middle of that Dalet Resh. So when a Kodesh Baruch Hu comes to illuminate the world as the Aleph which dwells within this world, Aleph Dar Adar, the only way for that to be successful as we partners with God in creation is to be Marba B'Simcha. And in fact, if you look at the Bnei Yissaschar, when he writes about the month of Adar, Adar is the last month of the year of months. And we know as Jews that our primary attachment to the four, obviously only Jews can have like 4 New Years, right? But anyhow, and if you go to the Gemara, there's even more than 4. That's just the mission that tricks you into thinking, oh, it's only 4. But anyhow, but we are most attached to the one of months, because the power of Chodesh is to be lechadesh, is to always make new. That's why if you actually look, if you take, there's 12 months in the year, and if you realize each month is created by Yud Kei Vav Kei in a different order, a different Seder, so 26 Yud Kei Vav Kei times 12 is the Gematria of Chodesh. Because that's the power of renewal, is that we can go beyond and above the world of nature and to connect to the infinite name of Hashem. Now, in the 4 letters of God's name, there's only one order that actually spells a word, and that is Vahaya, which is, and once upon a time. And when is once upon a time? Which Siruf of which month? That's Tishrei. Because Tishrei begins the world as we are living it here, in the world of once upon a time. But in the other 6 months, on the opposite 180-degree side of the calendar, Nisan, that's when the 4 letters Yud Kei Vav Kei are in their proper order. So the ultimate revelation of the Shekhinah and godliness and light in the world, we're really living with the pre-Gan Eden or pre-Chet Gan Eden was supposed to be about, that's rooted in months. So when we come to the end of that year, that's the darkest. The actual nature, the mazal of Adar is very depressing. It's very dark. And it's precisely because as Jews, we don't believe in, am I having fun yet? Joy is not about external stimulus. Joy is about radiating, is about putting that light into the darkness. So therefore, it's incumbent upon us not to be passive in Adar, but to be proactive and to actually be marba b'simcha. And why specifically simcha as opposed to sasan? And Jews, thank God, we don't lack words for joys. Because the word someach is the letter shin, which relates to the shin that sits on the tefillin, because this is the shin, the shekhinah, the eish, the light, that actually think of like coal miners, the little coal miner light of the shin that sits on top of our brain, which is moach. So moach, which is 48, and when the moach is from the same lashon as the word cham, which is warm, when the mind is active, when it's thinking and so on, then that energy of the mind illuminated creates simcha. If Chalila, the mind becomes cold and stagnant, then it becomes kar, then that same shin reveals sheker. It doesn't show the truth in the world anymore. It shows something because we're no longer seeing the world in its real depth. We've gotten lost or trapped by what we simply see with our eyes, as opposed to seeing with our third eye to be able to see something which goes beyond that. So that's why I thought that this class, maybe we could take a look and go deeper into these ideas. But I'm going to just, I know I kind of started, but now I'm going to start again, because I guess if they have 4 New Years, they're going to have 4 starts to the same class.
Okay, so here's the real piece of it. It goes like this. Don't go away. It's time to play. Beat the clock.
Right. So I just, while I was researching death in the Gemara, I just found, there was nothing like our sages. They're really like just the most, I have a new word. I don't like the word awesome. I like the word awe much. Right? It should just be like some awe. It should be like a lot of awe, like awe much. So our Chazal were really awe much. And so I just pulled this out. It's nothing to do with the class, but I just kind of thought it was cool. But these are like questions that only the Talmud would deal with. For example, in the Gemara Ksuvas, forgive my Ashkenazi, in the Gemara Ksuvas in 38b, the Gemara asks there, do we actually age in the grave? Is there such a thing as dead people having birthdays? And then the Gemara Chulin, towards the start there, says, I'm bringing sources,
Said he died.
Yeah. As my
He said it was the grave, so he never said he died. He in the grave and not died.
As my rabbi said, I didn't write this stuff, I'm not rewriting it, I'm just telling you what I found. So the Gemara Chulin asks, it says, will a person actually be able to make wishes after they die? Right, here we go, going back to the over 60 crowd here. Will I dream, Dave? Right? Space Odyssey. When he's unplugging the computer. Will I dream, Dave?
Right.
So then, this one was a kind of a little funky. That's probably why they hit it in like the middle of Yevamos, because they figure whoever learns all the Yevamos And if you do Daf Yomi, you're probably not paying attention to most of the stuff anyhow. So it says there, Lo Aleinu Chas v'Shalom, but after a person's wife dies, although technically she still has the din of a man's wife in certain aspects, like Yerusha and things like that, if Chas v'Shalom, another man had an intimate relationship with her, it still would not be called adultery. So that's just something to be aware of. I mean, this is the Gemara. Here. All right.
Just go on, just go on. No questions, folks, no questions.
Next. What is it, Johnny Carson? You just throw the cards on the... I only put that one to see if you guys were really listening. And if the Gemara doesn't say, I just made it up. No, it doesn't. 55b. Check it out. Yevamos. Okay, so how about like this one here? The Gemara Nida says, asks the question, can dead people speak Lashon Hara? Which is just kind of a great idea. And then, of course, the Gemara asks in Avodah Zorah, can man live forever? And the Gemara Baba Basra answers by saying, well, actually, there were 7 people who never died. And I find it very beautiful that one of those 7 was Eliezer, Eben, Avraham. Because it's so important to realize it may be wonderful and it's important to be a Talmud Chacham because that's great. It's Marvis Shalom Olam. But there's even a higher level, which is to serve other people. That's why if you look at the first Gra in the beginning of Sefer Yeshua, Yeshua is introduced as Eved Moshe and not as Talmud of Moshe, because to serve another person is a tremendous higher level. And here you see Eliezer is rewarded in that way. Okay, so now to the class.
Who are the 7?
You know what? Take a look. It's Baba Basra, 58a. I don't remember. And you got art scroll, you know, Rabbi Scroll will help you with the English. Rabbi Arthur. Okay, so I want to start a little bit with the Malach HaMavos.
Again, 50, which one?
58, no, 58a.
That was about
That was
the wife.
Yevama.
That's what you're concentrating on. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so the key question really is, what is death? And from there we're going to go into the angel of death, because again, going back in a reference here, go deep, but this is meaning of life, Monty Python. If you remember the scene where they're in the British home in the country, and there's a knock at the door, and there's an American family visiting, they're all around the table, and they open the door, and they're, who are you? And I'm the angel of death, with the whole thing, and oh, bump off. No, it comes right in. Of course, no one believes him until he hovers into the middle of the table, and then of course they realize he's probably for real. He says, okay, everybody, let's go, you're all dead, let's go. And so the last scene is he's walking up into the sky, and there's a little line walking behind him, and like the wife or the hostess, she yells out, Mr. Death, sir? Yes? What did we die from? And he says, the tuna fish. And the
Don't eat the tuna fish, folks, tonight.
Don't eat tuna.
And the husband yells,
shooters.
the husband yells out, I told you it smelled funny. And the very last thing, one guy says, wait, I didn't have any. So that was like the first image, thinking like the Malach HaMavos, that sort of like came time. But then I remember an amazing medrash, and the medrash says that Hashem asked for an angel to volunteer for the angel of death. And like, I imagine like in the movies where they all line up and everyone steps backward, leaving that one guy's idiot, right? So nobody's volunteering. And Hashem says, like, what's the problem here? And they say, well, who possibly wants to be known as the angel of death? I mean, it's really not a, on your resume, it doesn't really, right? So God says, oh, don't worry about it. No one will ever blame you. They'll say it was a war. They'll say it was a terror attack. They'll say it was a disease. No one will ever blame you. But it's really important to realize this is the most difficult thing, I think. I'm going to just speak personally for me, but I think I'm not the only one. I think the most difficult thing about being a true Jew, which sometimes at moments in our lives we really want to be what we were created to be, is to lock in our mind and leave it there this idea that there is God, meaning there is no injustice. That's really hard. But that's really what it is. And in hell, where we don't look at hell as being like, there are other people who look at it like there's heaven and hell and earth is in the middle and they're sort of fighting for who gets you. But we don't look at it like that at all. It's really earth is the lowest and hell is much higher. Hell is a very spiritual place because everybody's being healed. And when people are in hell, the one thing you never will hear is, what? Where's my lawyer? Probably because he's standing right next to you.
Turn on the heat.
There's a special hell for lawyers.
Exactly. So, but the reason is because everybody is really saying, this is what I chose in my life. And it's okay because we get through that also. Jews always get through everything. In fact, there's a joke like that Moshe comes running into Shlomi's store in Borough Park, freaked out. He says, Moshe, what's the matter? He says, what's the matter? You crazy? Didn't you hear Mashiach came? We're all moving to Eretz Yisrael? He says, calm down. We got through the war. We got through the depression. We'll get through this. Don't be so freaked about Mashiach. It's all right. We'll work it out. So, but that's the thing. Ultimately, it all really does work out. And the process is, of course, how we work on our going through there. But the thing I really want to share, and that's what these numerous Gemaras talk about, is that really the angel of death gets a bad rap. In fact, I'm going to quote you a Gemara here. It says that Reb Achor ber Yaakov said so they're talking about the subject of Sefer Yov, and it says that the reason the angel of death was so tough on Yov, was really because he wanted to protect the honor of Avram Avinu. And the Gemara says when the angel of death heard Reb Achor ber Yaakov say that, he came to the rabbi and kissed his feet out of thanks that somebody appreciated him and appreciated what it was he was doing. Because the whole idea of the angel of death is a very high angel. There's no idea, because we know the angel of death is the Satan and so on and so on, and we talk about when the Mashiach comes that he will die and be shechted and so on. That's not really what it means. It means that he'll finally be free to be the pure angel that he wishes to be. Because his job is in a way to assure that the will of God is manifest in this world. And so therefore, as long as man, meaning humans, are not making the mark, then death became the healing for the arrogance of the original sin of Adam, which was chutzpah. It wasn't the eating of the fruit. We do that all the time. We always sin. That's what being human's all about. That's why we come back next Yom Kippur. Not because we were liars last Yom Kippur, but because we have more we have to work out. We'll always be working on. There's no such thing in Jews as being, being. As Jews, we are perpetually becoming. But there's no, I've made it, I've arrived. That's nonsense. You've arrived only to now encounter other situations and get through those and go on to the next level. But that whole idea, therefore, is really the sin of Adam was the arrogance of not taking responsibility and trying to pass the buck. He says, it wasn't me, it was this woman, and you're the one who introduced me to her. I imagine if you're introducing me to her, she's come from Beis Yaakov, should know a little about kashrus, right? What's like with the treif apples, right? So the bottom line is that really, Adam should have stepped up to the plate and said, you know what, I made a mistake, I'm sorry. And that would have rectified everything, by the way. And that's where we are as well. In fact, that's why in this week's Parsha, we know the Gemara says that, in Gemara Shabbos, it says that when Moshe comes to get the Torah, the angel of death, the Satan, wasn't there. And when he comes back from wherever he was doing what he was doing, he sees the Torah's gone, he freaks. And he starts flying all around the world looking for the Torah. He sees that Moshe has the Torah. And when he sees Moshe, it says he sees a Ish Elokim. What does that mean, he sees Ish Elokim? It means he saw in Moshe what God had wanted Adam to have been. He understood that Adam was now back, and now Adam plus the Torah meant that this time they would get it right. And that's why we know that after the first set of the tablets, that really there was never going to be death again. The Jews had reached the level of beating death. And that's why the angel of death said, now that you have the ability to beat me, I don't need my secret anymore, and gave Moshe the secret of the Ketoret. Thank you. I usually try to do it all in one breath, but I appreciate it. So instead of like in TV, it's like a word from our sponsor, like a word to our sponsor.
What Gedalia is saying is that the angel of death taught Moshe his special secret, which is that the Ketoret has power over death,
Exactly.
which he didn't know. And when Moshe had that knowledge, he was able to tell Aaron to pass through the camp with the burning Ketoret during the plague, and then that prevented, that stopped the plague so that people stopped dying. And not only that, the people who had died came back to life again.
Yes, right. That exactly. This is also why it says that the Mashiach is always associated with the idea of Reach Nichoach also, because It's, you know, in New York we used to say, I can smell a rat, right? You can like sense a person from smell. But this is really a very deep idea also, because I don't want to get too off into this, but since Rav Avraham is here and Besamim is like a big issue, I'll just say that there is the idea that the menorah represents the 7 holes in one's head. Although if you grew up in New York, like I have a few extra in the back. But initially you have 7. If you look at the holes, you got 2 here, 2 and 2. So these are basically the 6 holes that correlate to the 6 days of the week, because in the world of duality, of the Bet of Bereshit, a person should be able to perceive like scales both sides of a oneness. And so therefore, these are primarily input. Whereas the mouth, which is the 7th point, is primary because we are medaber, is output. It takes the information that we bring in those 2 sides of the scale, weighs it on the heart, chad b'peh, chad b'lev, and then brings forward that truth of what it's all about. But the bandwidth, which is the smallest for perceiving outside, are the nostrils. And also the nostrils integrate the information prior to getting to the brain, whereas the ears and the eyes have to integrate it already at the brain point. So therefore it represents smell, and also it's of the lower level, able to come deeper into the world. It represents that level of being able to have that level of perception. So anyhow, oh, and I found it here. It's Gemara Avodah Zarah that says the greatest goodness is a world without death. So that's the opportunity that each one of us, we have this amazing, amazing ability, not to just necessarily design apps for iPhones, but to be able to bring a world, I know that's a little shocking, but to actually bring a world to life. And I have to tell you, because I spend a lot of time personally in technology, I watch very closely the whole world now is going into this VR, into virtual reality, where you see them wearing these like little masks. And it's almost as if it wasn't enough to be an ostrich and stick your head in the ground. Now you could be an ostrich like with your head still out of the ground. You know, it's really, there's something sick about it. It's like the ultimate way of, I mean, what's the bottom line of idolatry? Is that in real world, God made us in God's image. Idolatry is we make God in our image. So like virtual reality is almost a way of saying, I don't want anything to do with your world, God. I'm going to completely recreate the world however I want to position that world. And that's really like the ultimate death. It's like when you completely block out God, there's no greater death than that. Anyhow, the point I want to make is that there were many Amoraim and many Tanoim who became very close personal friends with the angel of death, because they understood. In fact, Shlomo Melech, there's an amazing story. The Gemara questions as to whether or not when a person's time is up, if not only do they have to die in a certain time, but do they have to die in a certain place. And the Gemara says, actually the Yerushalmi has a different version, but I'm just going to stay with the Bavli. It says that Shlomo comes, I guess, into the palace and he sees the angel of death, is really bummed out, sad. It's kind of funny because you imagine he'd always be sad, right? But anyhow, and he comes over and says, yo, death buddy, like what's happening? Why are you so bummed out? He says, well, there are these 2 guys I'm supposed to bring upstairs and I can't get them to where they're supposed to be. And so, Shlomo says, well, that's a real drag, sorry, bye. And he like runs over to the 2 guys and says, oh my gosh, look, I just da-da-da. And there used to be a place called the city of Luz, right, the Shangri-La, where nobody died. He says, run, quick, go there, and the angel of death can't get you there. Comes back the next day, there's the angel, all happy. He says, why are you happy? He says, well, remember those 2 guys I told you about? I couldn't figure out how to get them to the entrance of the city of Luz. And miraculously, there they were, unbelievable, delivered to the door. But the point of the story is, of course, you see this whole interaction with the angel of death in fulfilling the ratzon of Hashem. Next section. It's called the death process. This is a little morbid, I admit, but we got to be aware of this. You know, I have to...
We're old, it's not morbid.
Oh, okay, yes, it's sobering. It's sobering. You don't have to say when my father, Shalom, died.
I think it's the best trip we'll probably ever take.
Oh, well, Bezrat
I'm
Hashem.
not sitting next to you.
I mean,
When my father, Shalom, died, so we were in the... this was in Long Island, so we're in the funeral parlor and all, and my brother was there, and my son, and the guy's explaining, like, you know, do you want this, do you want that, and blah, blah, blah. And so my brother said, look, you know, I gotta tell you, it's like the first time my dad ever died. So, like, maybe he'll walk me through this. Like, you know, kind of new to all of this. You know. That's the worst thing is when your mom is in a funeral parlor and the guy's upselling you. What do you mean you don't want quadraphonic in the coffin? And now we got Wi-Fi. You don't have to put all those little cassettes on it. Anyhow, so the Gemara, actually in Avodah Zorah, gives a kind of elaborate story here. And it says that what happens is that when the angel of death appears, it appears and a person is startled at the sight of this angel, and the angel carries, besides I guess the sheath, carries in another hand a huge ball of living eyeballs. And this of course has to do with the ideas we say in Kriya Shema, not going after one's eyes and one's heart and so on. Although it's interesting, just as a side point, if you ever wanted to edit the Bible, if God ever comes along looking for an editor, it's sort of bizarre because in Kriya Shema you say, don't go after your heart and your eyes. You would think it should be your eyes and your heart, because first the eyes spot the Lamborghini, then the heart wants it. But the beauty of it, which is really amazing, is that no, we only think we want the Lamborghini because we've already trained our heart to think that that's worth buying. In other words, if you look at different cultures and different societies, what's called beautiful in one culture could be like, oh, in another culture, right? I mean, I don't know if you guys ever spend time in Asia walking through the marketplace, watching them like eating the beetles and all these things. Ooh, you like that with a little ketchup, right? It's really tough, but they gobble it up. They might gobble it up. But, so therefore, what it means is that we actually first educate ourselves for what our eyes look for. And the beauty of that means, therefore, we can reprogram what's on our heart. We're not subject to that. We're not products of our environment. Our environment can be a product of ourselves. But anyhow, so he shows up like that, and then it says that he moves closer to the person who's lying on the pillow, and then he has pulls out his sword, and at that point the person is, I would say, heavily freaked, and their mouth opens, and because the mouth opens, a little bitter drop comes off the end of the sword, and that bitter drop is what causes the person to go to the next world. It also causes the body to decompose and the face to turn green. The Gemara in Brachas says that there are 903 ways a person can leave this world. Right? There may be 50 shades of gray, but there are 903 different ways to leave this world. And it says that the righteous people leave this world like an eyelash being pulled out of milk, and the evil people, or the confused people is a nicer way to say it, leave this world like an inverted thorn being drawn through cotton. And I think that the way to understand this is there's a beautiful Malbim where when Yaakov dies, they embalm him. Now the Gemara in Tainus we know says Yaakov lo mate. So that would probably mean that Yaakov's last words are right? But, so how do they embalm him if he doesn't die? Right? So the Maral, everyone, the Malbim, everybody talks about this. And the way I understood the Maral, which is probably completely wrong, but at least this way, this image you'll remember for the rest of your lives at least, is that it's like Yaakov woke up one morning, and as he went like to open the door, his hand went through the door. He's like, whoa, that's weird. And looked back, oh look, I've died. So there was no sense of death. It was just fluid, right? Just kind of moved like that. And the Malbim explains actually that what happens is that the soul and the body intersect in 613 points on 13 meridians. And that each time a person does a mitzvah, the soul sits in the body like a hand in the glove. So therefore, when it leaves, it just simply, leaves like the way we pull our hand out of a glove. But if Chalila, we misuse that, so then the soul and the body become locked like a knot. Well, if you do tshuva, that's undoing the knot. If a person forgot to do tshuva while they still could, so how else can you undo the knot? Well, if one part of the knot decomposes, then it frees the other part. And therefore we try to assist the person in helping that decomposition. That's part of saying Kaddish. Sanctifying Kiddush Hashem is the greatest mitzvah in the world, sanctifying God's name in the world. So therefore, that's why if you read the text of Kaddish, there's no mention of death. It's all about praising God. And therefore, by praising God, the Yeshiva Shalmala, the Bezdin in heaven, looks down and says, whoa, this person is really beloved to us. Oh, and that person's beloved one has just joined us. So it helps in the elevation and the freeing of the soul coming out of the body. But the point of it is that it's really a process. And it's very interesting because there's a Gemara that talks about, actually one after the other. It seems it happened both to Rava and to Reb Nachman. that when the Gemara says both of them were falling asleep, meaning they were going into their death sleep, and they heard the rabbi say to the people who were in the room with him, help me, don't let him hurt me. Meaning he had already now seen the angel of death. And he was in, I mean, this is Rava and Nachman. Oh my gosh. My Rebbe always said to me, if you ever want to have a sense of who these people were, don't even forget about the Amoraim. Just go back like to the Achronim. He said if you ever walked into the room like where the Bach was, you would just evaporate. Because you couldn't exist in the presence of a person. You're gone. So what would it be? Forget an Amora. But these giant Amoraim, and they were horrified. And so in both cases they said to the Rebbes, can you please come back and tell us what it was like dying? And in both cases they actually did come back. And Reb Nachman said, they both, one said it was like being pierced or whatever, but like acupuncture. But Reb Nachman said, he said, look, if God had said to me, would you like to go back again and live further? I would have said no, because I wouldn't want to have that encounter a second time with the angel of death. So it's real. The Gemara says that at the last hour of a person's life, nobody jokes around, because it's a very sober. We really realize what we have been given in this lifetime. In fact, the Gemara goes on to say that it's a bad sign to die crying, but it's a good sign to die laughing. And Rebbe Eliezer, many of you know, was his last words when he died. He said, Tohar, pure. And when Rebbe died, he held up all 10 fingers and he said, I only use them in this world to serve you, God. And so these are like the things that we really, these are the lessons that our sages left us in order to really be able to know what it is that we can do here. We can serve God. We are higher than angels. I mean, think about this. Angels, no big deal. I mean, yes, all due respect, they're big deals. But I'm saying, for an angel to do Ratzon Hashem, I don't know if they have much alternative, although there are some wild Gemoras, which I wasn't going to bring, but now I will because I realize how wonderful this audience is. But there's one of my favorite death Gemoras is that the angel of death at the dispatch, obviously he doesn't handle all of it. There's a lot of people dying, right? So he's got a little dispatch here. Charlie, pick up Joe over on the corner of, right? So he sends out a dispatch to go get this woman named Miriam. And all of a sudden, I'm sure you know the word, all of a sudden they return with Miriam, and it's like, what the, right? What? I didn't mean that Miriam. Now the funny thing about the Gemara is Miriam doesn't get any lines. I would love to hear what's Miriam.
What's funny for Miriam?
Yeah. Well, she might what? So then the Gemara goes into this whole debate as to, what do we do with her extra years? Because the Gemara is discussing, can a person die before their time? What do you do with the extra years? And the Gemara's conclusion is they give it to a Talmud Chacham who is filled with rachamim, not enough to just be a scholar, but a compassionate one. And all the Torah and mitzvot that he will do with these extra years, Miriam gets credited for it. It becomes a partnership. But it's just an amazing, the little but you can just imagine the nerd angels who, you said Miriam. I don't know you mean that Miriam. Because we always imagine everything's completely perfect up there, It's kind of like when you make Aliyah. I remember when I made Aliyah, to me, the IDF, the Israeli military was awesome. Then I actually served in the Israeli military, and I said, wow, God's awesome. It's not the Keystone Cops called the IDF, it's God who protects us. But anyhow, so here's now the next step. Okay, now we died. You'll notice on your left. Okay, now that we've died, so now the next thing is coming to the next world. So coming to the next world, Gemara Nida says a very beautiful thing. The Gemara actually elsewhere describes when a baby is created, what part comes from the mother, what part comes from the father, which part, limbs and teeth and eyes and so on. But here the Gemara says, what part comes from God? So it says that when God gives to a child forming in its mommy's womb, it gives the child a ruach and a shama, the light of the face, eyesight, hearing, speech, movement, and the 3 levels of Chachma, Bina, and Das. And all of these things stay with the person even after their death. It's a very fascinating thing. It means that a person's face, in a sense, they're recognizable. the wisdom that they accrue remains. They continue to hear, as you'll see in a minute. They continue to see. They continue to have movement. So the only part that remains is this wonderful gift of this vehicle, that we use from point A to point B. But all of the rest of this that we know, it's not like, remember like Pez candy dispensers? It's not like we die and a little smoke comes out of the back and that's our soul off. No, we come out with full data, everything, we come out with like we come out with flip my lid.
Must be the smoke coming out.
Exactly. Yeah, usually the smoke goes in through my mouth. It doesn't. Thank you. So we come out with full data. I mean, we come out even with a REM. It's everything uploaded. We are very conscious of what's happening. And that's why I wanted to share with you some of these Gemaras. This is a Gemara from Moed Katan. I mean, before we get down into the details, this is just wonderful stuff. So the Gemara is talking about these two rabbis that have just died, and they're being brought up to Eretz Yisrael, and they're being carried in their coffins on these camels. And then all of a sudden, they come to a bridge where only one camel can go at a time, and the two camels freeze. Why? Because the two rabbis are debating from their coffins, no, you, right? Until they finally resolve it, and they just determine which one goes. By the way, I have to just tell you, I have a psak from my Rav. This may help save hours of your life. Because how many times you get in a situation where you want to, no, you just stand at the door, two people. With Jews, that could turn into a 20-minute ordeal. No, you. So here's what I was told by my rabbi. If you say to somebody, no, you, what are you trying to say? You're trying to honor them. So if they say to you, no, you, then go. Why? Because you're honoring them. That was the whole idea. You want to honor them. So now that they say go, by going, you're listening to them, you're honoring them. And poof, you saved 20 minutes. Right, exactly. It's a worthwhile tip. Here, the Gemara, you probably know this is my favorite. Also, when Reb Huna died, they wanted to bury him in those days, in Sanhedria, you can see they had these crypts that used to exist. So they wanted to bury him in the crypt of Reb Chia. Reb Chia was buried with his two famous sons of all Shas, and they're buried there. And there was a whole question as to who was actually going to go in. Nobody really even wanted to go in. Finally, one Rav goes in, and he's kind of going in there is that you, zombie? Going in there with really freaked out of his mind with the casket and so on. And when he comes in, he didn't know where to put it. And suddenly one of Reb Chia's sons says to the other son, why don't you get up and come over next to me and make room for Reb Huna? Well, I know if I was the guy carrying that casket,
Drop it.
I'd be gone. Everybody, you just see everybody outside the cave, and then so anyhow, so because they moved, this pillar came that almost burnt the coffin, but whatever. But I just using it as another great example of people who remain alive after they died. In fact, the Gemara says also Moed Katan, that same daf, it says God. This is, I think, very beautiful. In fact, that's the problem being a rabbi. You always hear these great Devar Torahs, and then you could deflect them by teaching them to other people, so you don't have to really take it personal, right? But I do try. So if we could just get this idea of not only because there's God, there is no such thing as injustice, as painful and as difficult as that is. Here's another thought. This to me is like, God welcomes the souls of the righteous to the next world like welcoming a bride. Wouldn't that be amazing? I mean, after all we have to live through down here in this world, that to just have that sense, I mean, Kavayach, it's hard to imagine, obviously, but that sense of that cosmic Yashikoyach, you made it, bravo. I get the image, you ever watch football games? When they come out, they all line up slap. Yo, Gabriel, Raphael, Michael, yo. Hey, he's back from Earth. Yo. Right? Great job. Hashem can't wait to see you. Right? I mean, that's that would definitely. I mean, we'll get to the alternative greetings, but that would be at least my first choice. That's plan A. However, and on that same Gemara also, it says that mourn for the mourners. Right? Mourn for the mourners because they have lost, but not for the dead because they have gained. That's the lashon of the Gemara. The Gemara also says here, supernatural events that occurred in this world at the death of great tzaddikim. I just bunched them together. But columns in city streets that began shedding water, gutters that began overflowing with blood, stars that were seen in the middle of the day, trees in a city becoming completely uprooted, fiery stones falling from heaven, and palm trees growing thorns. Again, this is the kind of Gemara you really need to learn the Moshav and Ben Yehoyada and really understand what these metaphors are all about. That each one is a world unto itself and worth the while. But just even on the simple shot level, it's an amazing kind of a thought. The souls of the righteous are kept beneath God's throne, while the souls of the evil are tossed between two angels from one end of the universe to the other. And right, you see that on the Tel Aviv beaches with the right? So, but the average people are initially handed over to the angel Duma, which is the angel who takes care of the dead people. Duma from the Lashon silent, quiet. The Gemara elsewhere says, why is the angel called the angel of silent? Because all the dead people constantly are like pulling on his, like, you know, whatever, and saying, when's Mashiach coming? When's Mashiach coming? Because they know then they'll all go back through Trias and Mesim, and he says, shh. So that's the angel Duma. And then finally they're handed over to them, and then average people find their rest in heaven. Say, a righteous person is greeted by 3 angels when he dies, whereas a not so righteous person is greeted by 3 damaging angels, you know, hell's angels. Yo, you. And here to me, I think is something that's a good wake-up call. This is the Gemara Chagiga. You know, it's actually the Zohar also writes this. It says that when the brothers realized Yosef says, Ani Yosef, they were like in shock. So the Gemara says, and the Zohar elaborates even more, it says, well, after a person dies, after 120 years, they hear, Ani Hashem, I am God. And it's the same shock multiplied. Because it's like the same way the brothers just could not believe it was Yosef. It was like, it's almost impossible to really, really believe. And don't feel bad about this, because we see great people like Noach, goes around for 120 years. You know, here comes Noach. Let me guess what he's going to talk about, right? 120 years he's walking around talking about this coming flood and this and that. Yet, even Noach, when the flood was there, it says the water came up and he had Hashem to push him into the ark because he couldn't believe it. Even though he lived his life, we live our life, we believe in God. But we, you know, and at that moment, that's such an intense impact of that Ani Hashem. Okay, so then jump cut to, do the dead even care about the living? So the Gemara actually, in Brachas, you probably know these Gemaras, asks this, do the dead, and of course brings the famous story of the guy who has a fight with his wife and he goes to sleep in the graveyard and he overhears 2 dead women and one of them's kind of improperly buried, so she's stuck. You know, that's a little image, like a little rope around a dead person, kind of like, and her friend said, come on, let's go see what they're going to decide for the new year. She says, you go and come back and tell me. So she does. And of course, this guy's lying in the grave, they don't know he's there. He picks up all this information and he becomes a mega millionaire because he knows exactly what to plant because he's got like inside information and, you know, the tips and so on. But the point is, the Gemara is really not really talking about him becoming rich. The point was that they want to know, do the dead care? And the Gemara concludes from that that's not a good proof, actually, because they don't really show about how they interact with them. But there's a Gemara in Shabbos.
Not only care, do they know?
Exactly, what's going on with us, right. But the Gemara in Shabbos, however, on 152b, I guess they imagine that's like an area in the Masechta you never get to, so it's safe to write it over there. It says, it asks clearly, at what point did the dead stop hearing? Right, so the interesting thing is not like when they die. That's not no one says that. They either are at the moment when the coffin is closed, or it's the moment when the body has completely gone back to nature. So there would be, meaning that for an extensive period of time, even in the grave, the deceased are able to hear. And then the Gemara goes on, it says, for the first 12 months after death, the soul travels between heaven and earth. However, at the end of that, it reaches its final resting place, but it still can return to earth if it wishes to. And I'll just tell you a little story. Because I know that most of the people...
Say that again, please.
The soul goes back and forth between heaven and earth for the first 12 months. At the end of the 12 months, maybe early, of course, because that's why we stop saying Kaddish after 11 months, it finds its resting place, but it can still come back to this world if it wishes to.
Forever.
Yeah.
And certainly on the earth side, I mean, we say it always comes back on the earth side. Now that it's like hovering there.
Well, no. Once it goes to heaven, it's option to come back. But I just want to tell you a personal story, which I normally don't do when I teach, but since I know so many of you here and love you so much for so many years, and the people I don't know, I imagine how I would love you just as much. And also, knowing the ones that I know here, I know that you guys are as whacked out as I am. So therefore, it's okay to tell you a story which is going to be totally whacked out because, hey, it's me. Hello? So, I was with somebody many of you know, Raphael Marachi, and his late mother Alea Sham's home in Gibraltar. They had this like women's luncheon thing, and because I was there, I was invited to come and be there. So I'm like sitting there with Rafi, like, you know what? And afterwards, he has this one aunt who's known as the mystical woman of Gibraltar. You know, she probably walks around at night with a little lantern. Anyhow, which is very cool. And I see her walk over to Rafi, and I see them like. And then I see them both looking at me, and like Rafi's pointing to me, and I see Rafi going, and then she now comes over to me, and I'm like, okay, seatbelt. So she comes over. This is actually a heavy story, but anyhow, so she comes over and she asks me. She said, "Did you have a child that died?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, because he's right here, and he wants you to know he's okay." That's what she said. So I was like, "Whew." Yeah. I was like, I said, "Okay, well, I'm leaving now." I didn't know she had a list of things, but that was fine. So now, if you ever see, I have a twitch now because I'm always like, or sometimes I try to, "Ha, got you." Fake out. Anyhow, so fine. Where were we here? Yes. Okay. Oh, here. Oh, these are my two. It's hard to say favorite, but definitely among my favorite stories in the death sector of Shas. And one of them is, this is great. Reb Nachman has, his workers are in the field working, and they're like, getting the ready, like the field, and they're putting the thing, and all of a sudden, and they hear, "Ow!" come out from, like, what? Like they chant, "Ow!" Right? And there's a voice coming out from under this, and they like, "Oh!" And they get Reb Nachman. Reb Nachman comes running back, and they're standing there, and the Gemara actually goes back and forth. There's a rabbi who had been buried 200 years earlier in his grave, and they're having this conversation, and like, and this guy is like saying, I remember unfortunately, he's like thinking, Nachman was like one of the gedolim of his generation, but this guy's like, oh, these guys, they don't know any Torah. Like, what's this rabbi talking about? And I was like, the rabbi in the grave is basically like ranking out Reb Nachman. And then Reb Nachman says, "Oh, well, okay, so like, listen, if you're alive, would you like to come into my house?" And he says, "Hello, don't you know anything? Don't you know that we have to remain here until God tells us to come out? We can't come out." "Oh, I'll be right back. Where's the men's room? 200 years, I really gotta go." So it's like, but like, this is just set as straight up Gemara. I mean, that's the Gemara. And then there's another one, that Gemara's in Shabbos, also 152. But another one, Baba Basra on 58a, which I think we were there before, 58a. So you'll catch these as well. It's not a Canadian Gemara, by the way, it's 58a. Okay. So the Gemara there, it says that
The 7 people who died.
yes. So this is another story about that. So this one is, there was a magician who was, I guess he didn't make enough money doing magic tricks, so he also was a grave robber. I guess the grave robbing part, you didn't have to give a receipt. So, it was fine. So there was this grave robber. Now here's the cool thing. Just makes you make the grave robber magician was a dear friend of Abaya, one of the giant Amoraim. It wasn't like this, "No, I live in Bnei Brak, I don't talk to you people." It was like, here was like his buddy, was this grave robber, magician. So one day the Gemara says he was robbing a grave, and when he robbed the grave, the dead man's hand grabbed the beard of the robber, and the robber's like stuck yelling for help until Abaya had to come, talk to the dead guy and convince him to let go. Now, you would have imagined that this grave robber would have learned his lesson. No. He comes back another day. Obviously, he forgot exactly which grave was that guy. And now, he's caught again. And the buyer can't get this guy. The Gemara says the buyer has to go get scissors. So, these are extraordinary stories. This one I'm sure everybody knows, the next two, but to me they're just very touching. And that is, we know that after Rebbe died, he came back every Friday night. That's the famous Gemara. And yes, in Ksubas, he would come back and make Kiddush, which reminds me, there was a Chassidish Rebbe not long ago that died, and his son would call him up for an aliyah in the shul, and you would just hear quiet, and you hear the son going, Baruch Hu Shema, Amen. And so I said, you know, being me, I'm from New York, so yeah, give him a Hagba. Then I'm on board. But when it comes to Rebbe, I believe it. We know it's Rebbe. And of course, what happened ultimately, he got caught. He told his household no one's ever supposed to say, but unfortunately he got caught. And this is the beauty, because this is what a real tzaddik gadol is. He stopped coming to his own family's house merely to not embarrass other dead people who were unable to come back to make Kiddush in the home. That, like, even as a dead man, still the depth of this sensitivity and this love of always caring about other. And then, of course, we know the Gemara also about Baba Metzia of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Shimon Bar Yochai, that many years after he died, he was actually in the attic. And people would come outside and they would yell up and he would yell back, "Psak." And he would answer, and his wife would come, and all these 14 years, nothing ever deteriorated except once she saw a little worm, the Gemara says, coming out of his ear. And when he appeared to her, I think this was somehow or another, the word came back that happened because once he heard Lashon Hara being spoken about a rabbi, and he didn't protest. So that was that only little. And what's so amazing is the Gemara says that when finally Reb Shimon Bar Yochai himself came from the other world and said, "Please let my son be buried with me," which of course we know today he is in Oron, the townspeople wanted to fight him because they didn't want the body to leave, because they said that for the entire time he was there, a dangerous animal never came into the city, that just his mere presence protected him. Okay, next section. Judgment Day. So the Gemara says, I'll start like low, and we'll bump down and then work our way up. The Gemara says that there are three people who do not come out of hell. One is somebody who embarrasses another person. One is somebody who sleeps with a married woman other than his wife, obviously, because we all sleep with married women. And the third one is somebody who routinely calls somebody by a derogatory nickname. And of course, the Gemara there says that this is only in a case where a person has not done tshuva. Tshuva does and repairs. By the way, I'm sure you know from this week's parsha, you have the large nun in the 13 characteristics, because that's to show you that tshuva always opens the 50th gate of wisdom. Nothing can stand before tshuva. That's why tshuva was created before the world. Okay, then the Gemara goes, I'm sure you know this, the famous 6 questions. Now, I don't know about you, but there were certain kids, like when I went to school, they were just like, you know, there was a big exam, SATs, GMATs, whatever, like, or finals, or midterms, right? All those horrifying phrases we grew up with. And they would just like party, come in, drunk, hungover, sit down and knock off a 100 on the exam. Like they were just like natural born genius, you know? Me, if I didn't like weeks breaking, maybe I'd pull off a B- if I really, really studied. So I thought, you know what? Every time B+. Every time you would like come in, you know, and you really study for the exam, you could welcome the exam. Because, you know, yo, bring it on, I can do this. And if you don't, then you're really nervous. So I would imagine that if you know what they're going to ask on the final exam, this would definitely be the one to cram for. You know, you don't have to do like uppers. You can just like do it while you're like alive and focus on it. So the Gemara gives us the exam. This is the final exam, 6 questions. Obviously, we're not going to do this in this class, but we relate to the 6 orders of the Talmud. But roughly, the very first one is, were you honest in business? And just one little comment on why is that the kickoff one, is because the way you are in business is the acid test as to whether or not you really believe in God. You know, it's really easy to put on tefillin and so on. And maybe it's not easy, but you know, you feel holy. But when you're really there and you could sneak a few bucks in the pocket because nobody notices you, you can screw your partner, you won't notice or whatever, and you don't do it because you know you're never alone, God's with you 24/7, that shows a real fear of God. So if you get to that one, then you can hurdle to the next one, and that was, of course, did you fix time in your day to learn Torah? And really, it doesn't necessarily matter if you fixed a lot of time or a little time. The key thing is fixed. Now, I've heard fixed in two ways. Fixed could be 9 o'clock every morning fixed, or fixed can be a daf every day, regardless of what time. But the idea is that it becomes, because even if you spend a fraction of your day learning, and this goes men and women, you know, we all need to learn, but if you spend a fraction of your time learning, and most of your day in your business, it doesn't matter. Because the fact you fixed it means that it was koveya, it was kavua, it was the ikr, and the rest, even though it was the majority, it was still just secondary, it was tuffle. By the way, I don't know why this popped into my mind, but because it did, I want to share this with you. It's not really relevant to dying, so I apologize. But, but it's beautiful, one of the most beautiful Torahs I've heard from the Chazon Ish. The Mishnah, and it's relevant for Kohanim and all of us as well. The Mishnah in Avos says there about describing being the Talmud of Aaron, about loving people, actively pursuing peace with people, not just like being but like really going out and you know, loving creation and so on. And the Mishnah ends, it says, and the bottom line is, bring people close to Torah. So the obvious question is, what? You know, the purpose is to bring people close to God. That's what it's all about. And so the Chazon Ish, if I remember correctly, the Chazon Ish says there's nothing more arrogant than for one person to think that they're closer to God than another person. You can have like the longest beard, payas, and you know, make motzi on Shabbos with 12 challahs or whatever, and the Chiloni guy who's standing there like, you know, with a Magen David tattooed on his forehead, that guy could be much closer to God than this other guy might ever get in his life. We don't know who he's a reincarnation. Maybe he only has a little snippet he has to do. So you never know where somebody's out close or far from God. However, what you know is, regardless, no matter who that person is or who I am, we can always become more. So therefore, by bringing a person to teach more Torah, when you teach Torah, not like, oh, I'm the rabbi teacher and you are the, you know, not like, but like, hey, you want to see something really cool? I just learned this. Look, like you're giving, you're sharing life with your buddy. That's the way to disseminate Torah, and that's the real love of peace and love of creation and so on. So now back to our program.
Okay, now on number 2,
Yeah.
on the final exam, the Yalva Rebbe had a completely different take on that. Your explanation was, do you make fixed time for studying Torah? 4 o'clock every day I learn. The Yalva Rebbe's take on it was, did you make the times, did you fix the Torah according to the times that you're living? In other words, did you make your Torah learning and practice and comprehension relevant to the time and place where you're living? That's his.
Thank you. That's the next class. I mean, next time I do that class, that's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. So number 3, did you raise children with a desire to come close to God and to learn Torah? By the way, we all know that, you know, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, for example, and other great people never had children. So the idea of children is not necessarily biological offspring. It's about people that you care and take care of and so on. You know, I have my son is married to a family, live in Jerusalem. I have 14 children, and on top of that, they adopted 2 mentally handicapped children. And I've watched these children over the last 18 years, and these children, what they've done with them, they've created these lives. So anytime one gives life through charity or through Torah or through giving a job or from even real children, it's all about how and what do we give in that giving. The next one is, of course, did we hope for the redemption? The next one is, did you sharpen your learning? And the last one is, did you go over your learning and explore its inner meanings? But here's the most important. This is all Gemara Shabbos on 31a if you want to check it out. Here's the bottom line. The Gemara's conclusion is, at the end of the day, on all of these, the real question is simply, did you have fear of God? Meaning, did you have God consciousness? because that's really what it's all about. You know, I mean, if you think about it, you have two vessels, one holds 100 units and one holds 10 units, and the unit that holds 10 is filled with 10, and the one that holds 100 is filled with 70. Really, the one that has 10 and 10 is greater, because it fulfilled what it was created to be. So it's not merely about going out there and showing how much you could bench press, and and you're learning. It's really about living it, and the living it is about in the honesty of who we really are. Okay, let's speed ahead here. The Gemara increases, says that at the end of the day, on speaking of judgment, only God knows how God is and will tip the scales in our favor. The Gemara says that a dead person is punished for false praise said about him, as one is the one who said it, and all of those who agree with him. By the way, there are thousands of Gemaras. I'm only picking out the unusual ones that we don't normally hear. The Gemara goes on to say, a person who causes another person to be harmed will not be welcomed by God in the next world. The Gemara, these are all different Gemaras. Again, I'll leave this with Richard, anyone who wants to check this out later. The Gemara says, even though people will cry on their way to hell, at the same time they will praise God for his justice. There are 7 names for hell. These represent different levels of darkness, if you will, but the names are Sheol, which we kind of don't know what that is, utter destruction, so obviously Sheol is worse than that, the well of destruction, the well of noise, which I found very interesting, mud, shadow of death, and the underworld. Again, it's going to Erevin, you can look that up, and really, that's a Ben Yehuda there who really goes through each one of the names and what they mean, and who said each one. Because it wasn't one person, oh, these are the names, which Navi said which. It's very, very telling. But the Gemara also says in Erevin that Abraham Avinu will save every one of his children from the fire of hell, except for a Jewish man who had intimate relations with a non-Jewish woman, unless he did tshuva. But I like this Gemara better. That's wonderful that that's what Avram will do. But here is, what did Reb Yochanan do? So we know there's a whole story by Acher, that Acher, we don't have to tell it because everyone knows the story, but Acher had fallen so low that even after he died, there was a non-stop smoke that came up out of his grave. And 2 generations later, because Rabbi Yochanan was not in the period of, because Acher was already the Rebbe of Rabbi Meir, Tanan, Rabbi Yochanan, although on the border, was 2 generations later, it says that when Rabbi Yochanan died, he dove into hell to find Acher, grabbed him, and brought him to heaven, and the Gemara says, and nobody dared to stop him. And that's when the smoke stopped. It's an amazing thing. Yeah, I don't know if you learn snippets about these people, but when you learn about Reb Yochanan, everybody knows the famous Gemara in Brachas, which Tosfos says actually was a tooth, because it's a shaila otherwise of Tuma, but that he lost 10 sons. And by the 10th son, he, let's say, took a tooth, and made a necklace out of it. So when he would come to somebody who had suffered a horrible loss or a horrible situation, he would show them his 10th son who had died, not just simply to say, I feel your pain, I know where you are, I've been there. But what people don't know about Reb Yochanan is his whole life was in pain. Reb Yochanan's father died when his mother conceived and she died at birth. He was an orphan. So here's a man who could have such a mega chip on his shoulder. You know? My gosh, my very birth, I never knew my mother, I never knew my father, I lose 10 sons. But despite all of that, no, I'm here to serve God. I'm not here to fetch, I'm here to serve God. And even when I die, I'm going to serve God, because I'm going to go in there and find Acher. Why did everybody leave him? He doesn't belong in hell, and I'm going to pull even him out of hell. It's... What's that?
They say that with all that pain, he also lives for 300 years.
Right, I didn't get to that Gemara yet. But Reb Yochanan definitely had an extraordinary life. I'll say that with you. We all know he walked into the dark room of Reb Elazar and he pulled up the sleeve and lit the room and so on. So he was an extraordinary individual for sure. But the point, at least I wanted, because whenever it was 300 or whatever, he, even in his death, it wasn't about, oh, I'm dying. It's like, oh, what can I do? What can I still do? Oh, I'm dying? Wow, great opportunity to go find Acher and pull him out of hell.
His death was very tragic.
Yes. Well, look, we can go through all the... Right, from A to Z, his life was a tragedy, right, for sure. Very depressed after the whole Rish Lakish loss and so on. Okay. Before God, the Gemara in Chagiah says, before God, a person will not be able to justify or excuse his shortcomings or failure to reach his potential. Gemara in Sanhedrin says that a person who is a liar can never stand before God, because obviously the chatima of that, that was the part I forgot back here, of death, is emet. So what does it mean that it says Yaakov lo met, and then of course Yaakov was embalmed? Because the word emet is aleph with the word death. It's aleph and met. So the Maharal explains it that there are three parts of the person. There is the body, which does mitzvot, that's the mem. There is the neshama, the wisdom that does Torah, that's the taf. But then there's the aleph, which is the love. So a person could, God forbid, be the most religious looking person in the world with all the Torah, all the mitzvot, and so on. But if there's no love, they're dead. And if there is love, if the aleph is attached, then they're never dead. That's the idea. Yaakov never died because Yaakov is Tiferet. He was the love of the heart. So our own actions will interview us, the Gemara says, and we will sign a testimony. Sounds like the Mishnah in Avos, but it's Gemara in Tainus. And everything claimed is that we will sign that everything that's claimed against us is correct. By the way, I'll just tell you an interesting Torah from Mordechai Scheinberger. Says that after a person dies, they go upstairs and you have to first go to the devil. And he's got a little computer printout. I guess he types in your Zut, and whoop, out comes like everything you ever did. And on here, it's not enough because it'll also have, hopefully only have, all the mitzvot that you did. But the angel of death, or the devil, has to take out his pen, and next to each mitzvah, he writes how many cubic pounds of resistance did the devil apply for you to perform that commandment. As the Baal Shem says, we have to keep all the mitzvahs, but those mitzvahs that come easy to us, like there's some people who just whip money out of their pocket and give charity, that means that they've already worked that out in a previous life, and the person who's very hard to pull that money out, that means this is their challenge in this world. So the mitzvot that are dafka hard to do, those are the way the Baal Shem says that we learn what we must do. Those are the battlefronts. So therefore he says the idea of Reb Shlomo says, it's not merely that you perform the mitzvah, it's that the devil has to say how much he's resisted to stop you from performing the mitzvah. That actually gives that kind of power and credibility. And of course the Gemara in Avodah Zarah says every mitzvah that we do creates a good deed, an angel that will be there to testify us in the next world. On the other hand, I thought, I'll end on this section, we'll go to the last section and finish this up. The Gemara also says 3 people who never go to hell, right? We started 3 people who go to hell, or never come out of hell, then the 3 who never go. And the Gemara there in Eruvin says a poor person. It also says a person who suffered from stomach illness, and if you know the story of Rav and all, we don't need to go there now. And also someone who was hassled by the government. Or hassled by debtors. And then the Gemara adds, and there's a Yeshomrim, because there's always got to be a Yeshomrim, somebody who lived with a really bad wife, and I would add, or bad husband. Exactly. All right. There have been times in my life where I often said, somebody says, I feel like I'm in hell. I say, well, actually, I own an apartment there. Would you like the keys? Or I could just imagine some of us with what we've been through, we go to hell, burst out laughing. What? This is hell? Are you kidding? This is paradise. Exactly. Give me hell, man. The first, poverty. And then the second one was people who were harassed by the government. And the Gemara reinforces the one in poverty. Back in Yevamos, up in 102, like those areas of Yevamos we never get to, the Gemara says there that a person who experienced the taste of poverty, or a person who really did fear God, regardless of their mistakes, will be freed from hell. And of course, there's the famous Reish Lakish appears twice in Shas, that he says that even the evil people will be protected, and he uses like the idea of the Ketoret, the Mizbeach for the Ketoret, because it had that little copper, but yet somehow the fire which came down was able to stop the thing from being destroyed. So even the fact that the evil Jews or the confused Jews are filled like pomegranates. And I'm sure everybody here knows somebody who went out and cut up a pomegranate trying to count 613. Yeah, we all know. Yes,
Not even close.
exactly. So this is how Reb Nachman Kahan explains the Gemara, which I found very beautiful. First of all, it doesn't say 6:13, it just says marba ki mitzvot. Okay, but his point is like this: when a person does mitzvot, the main purpose of doing a mitzvah is to attach oneself to God. But many times we forget that. We just do it because we put on tefillin every morning. We forget that we're supposed to be attaching ourselves to God. And so therefore what happens is that we still do the mitzvah, and when you open up the pomegranate, what do you see? That all the seeds are in compartments. They're not cohesive. And that's what it means, that even the confused Jews are still doing good things. How could they not? But they're not really utilizing its potential of unifying. But since it's still there, then that also serves as a great level of protection. Last thing on that is, if a person does tshuva, Gemara in Sota says, they will be able to jump into the next world like the Avos did through the power of call, which I'll leave you to give a shir on call, because that's a whole world in itself. Makol mikol call. But through the power of call and through the tshuva, a person can actually jump. And the language of jump, as you know, is the language of angels. Angels don't walk, they jump. So therefore, that's this idea of the soul pops out like an angel. And the last thing is, the Talmud says that people who really do tshuva, excuse me, are called rabbis in the next world. Or I guess rebbitzins.
What do you call them in this world?
I like to call them my friends. Okay, here we go. So the last thing I have here is, and then we'll do the conclusion, is the famous, did anybody ever come back from the dead? Yeah, I believe in life after death. If somebody comes back and tells me personally. So there are people who have had
life-death experiences.
Have had, yes, right. But in fact, there's a rabbi, I can't remember his name right now. Is everybody here familiar with Moody, Dr. Moody?
Yes, I read his book.
Yes. So there was a rabbi who took his book and lined it up with passages from the Zohar. And so obviously, even with Moody, all of his interviews, there were, nobody was interviewed been dead for 4 years who came back, right? But so the Zohar continues with the Moody books, and unfortunately I can't remember the name of the book. But I'm sure it's findable. Anyhow, so there's a famous story of the Ramban. Maybe you read, the Ramban actually supposedly asked one of his elderly students who's about to die to, when he goes to heaven, to please ask certain things should be done. And come back in a dream and tell me that you did it. And the Ramban is the guy's not coming back. So finally the Ramban's okay, yeah. And he goes and finds the guy. It's also kind of amazing. And they go, oh, I'm so sorry, but when I came up here it was so awesome. I completely forgot I was ever back there on Earth. So that's just the Ramban's story. But there's a very famous Gemara, which is brought twice. Now in one Girsa, which is, I think, the Gemara in Baba Basra, I don't remember exactly. There, the Girsa doesn't make it sound like Reb Yosef actually died. But if you look at the other Girsa in Psachim, which is on Daf Nun, good way to remember it, it's clear that he died. So Reb Yosef, who was the son of Reb Yeshua ben Levi, whose kever they found not so long ago, if you've been following, that's kind of cool. So he died and came back to... What's that?
We saw it.
Oh, you saw it? Oh, it's like it's some guy's Zimmer or something, right?
Mitch Pilser.
Oh, yes. Oh, wow. So, yeah, there's a story which I didn't bring, which, of course, he snags the knife of the angel of death and hops it down and refuses to give it back. But like I said, there are millions of stories which we can't do. But that was Reb Shlomo Carlebach. So, his son dies and comes back to life, and he asks his son, kind of like a reporter, okay, well, what was it like over there? And the son says, all the important people in this world were meaningless. And all the little insignificant people in this world, those were the treasured ones. But that's kind of cool. But what I found even more amazing is he says, and what were we like? Now think about that question. What does it mean? What were we like? You're not dead. Right? I can understand you can ask, what were the dead like? Because they died. But how could he say, what were we like? We haven't died yet. And what's more amazing, he answered him. And he answers and says, just like we are in this world. So that really needs a lot of thought. And so the commentaries I've looked on that explain as follows, that when we talk about Olam Haba, the world to come, because we live in chronological time, we think about it as we're here, and then we'll be there. But by Yud K Vav K, there's only now. There's no then by God, there's all now. And so therefore, what will be in the future is not God's future, it always is. In fact, if you just want to digress for a half second, but trust me, you're going to love this. This is better, I'm sorry, this is better than driving past Big Sur on Route 5.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
It is very cool. So, oh, thank you. So, was it Route 1?
Actually,
Oh, 101, thank you. Right, like 5 was the icky one, that was like, oh.
Right.
Yeah, I understand. So think about this for a minute. Let's talk for 2 seconds about reincarnation. So we always think about what's reincarnation? A person lives, and then they die, and then they come back. Okay, but that's only because we think of chronological time. But the purpose of coming back is God creates a scenario where, given that scenario, we have the opportunity to fix whatever we didn't fix in an earlier life. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be born in our future. So, as long as the scenario is appropriate, a person could actually be reincarnated in our past. Like, you live now, but not you, Chas v'shalom. A person lives now, they die, they could be reborn in the 17th century. Because the only reason the 17th century is in the past.
The Outlander.
That's what I was thinking.
Oh.
Outlander. Exactly.
So,
There's a novel about
Thank
this.
you.
oh yeah?
No. It's
There's like
8
6 novels, 8
Okay.
novels.
So if
And it's great.
But if you
It's a
take
TV
it,
show.
if you take it a step forward, it can actually be that the moment you're born in the hospital, in the crib, bless you, the baby being born next to you is already your reincarnation. Well, we'll leave it there. Let you play with that.
It could be a different party.
Yeah, exactly. Why not?
Different part of it.
What did you say?
Different part, different part.
Exactly. Some of them I'd rather not
Different
met.
bodies.
Okay, so,
Infinite what it could be.
yes, exactly. All right, so we're gonna
threads make a lot of
this
cloth.
little last section here is just called the conclusion. And the good news is that everybody comes back. That's really the most important thing. In fact, the Gemara in Yerushalmi in Kalayim says that even the most evil of kings will come back, because there will be a time in the land of Israel where the land will be burning for 7 years. And as a result of that, that will actually torment their graves, which will be the atonement, so that even they will also be able to come back into this world. And the last thing here is really lessons for us, those of us while we are still here and are alive. And that is, it says, as difficult as it may be, Warren Erevin says, it is important that a person should train himself to accept death at the hand of God graciously. Because really, we didn't pay for this. It's a gift. And it's God's to take when God chooses. And may God choose only after 120 years, and we should only have health and good life and so on. But we really need to appreciate that this is just something that God has blessed us with. Rabbi Lezer on his deathbed, there are many, many stories about this in Shas. I just chose 2. One I'm sure you'll know, maybe even this one you know. When they, at the last moment of these great tzaddikim, their lives are culminating, they asked them, how do you merit going to heaven? What were their words? That we can live in our lives, make it, like you said, appropriate for our lives. So be careful with your friend's honor. Bring your children up to become scholars, and know that you stand before God when you pray. And then the other Gemara, which is in the same place, is the famous one everyone knows of Reb Yochanan ben Zakkai when he was about to die. And he said, may you fear God at least as much as you fear your friends. And they said, only that? And he said, halavai, even that. By the way, the only other great halavai I ever heard in my life was I was in a room when this anti-Semite from Le Monde newspaper was interviewing Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. And at one point in the interview, she says to him, and what do you think about the elders of Zion, the protocols? And Rabbi, I don't know if you've ever met Rabbi Steinsaltz, but he always has like this pipe, and there's like little smoke always, and everyone's like clouds. You see his face for a minute. It's like a whole translucent experience. So at that moment, like the cloud parts, and he looks at her and he says, halavai. We should only be so well organized. But better you should think we are. Anyhow. Okay, so here, the last couple here is, the Gemara says it's very important to encourage a person on their deathbed to do tshuva, because as the Talmud says, there is nothing greater and nothing will stand better in the defense of a person than tshuva and masim tovim. And each time that we do tshuva and masim tovim, like we said before, these create angels that stand there in our benefit and protect us. And when judgment comes, they will be the ones that will speak on our behalf. The Gemara says that, this is a wild Gemara, it's in Shabbos, it says that when a person is being judged in the next world, even if there are 999 angels saying, burn him in hell, but one angel says, no, he's okay, God will save him. The Gemara says in Shabbos also, it says that a person who held jealousy in his heart will find that his bones will decompose in the grave. That's the price of jealousy. And that's why the Gemara says, to avoid that, a person should strive to give back a clean soul the same way it had been given to them when they were born. And the last one is the Gemara Chagiga. The Gemara says, why are the words of the Torah compared to a cattle prod, the thing that's used to push the animals? In order to lead a person from the path of death to the path of life. The Zohar actually brings in a very interesting thing, because it's relevant to this week's parsha, the last couple parshas, that we know the Gemara says that when all the Jews, we heard the first 10 commandments, we didn't understand anything but the first 2. The other 8 were blurry. And when we heard the first 2, some people actually died and came back to life. Other people were like blown away and angels had to bring them back. But the point is that the people that died went over to Moshe and they said, whoa, there's another 600 and how many after this? Which is, by the way, if you ever noticed, the Gematria of Torah is 611. It should be 613, right? Why only 611? Because the first 2 we didn't hear from Moshe, we got them directly from God. So they said, Moshe, this is awesome, whatever you can score, go, but we don't want, right? And so the Mel Brooks version, everybody got the 15, whoops, 10, right? Is he dropped one of the tablets? Anyhow, so they say to Moshe, like, you just go up there because we're afraid that we're going to die. And Moshe says, no, this is not the tree of death, this is the tree of life. That's where the first expression, Eitz Chaim Hi, because they were afraid of dying. No, you hold on to this tree, you will live. And that's what we have. We have this amazing opportunity. No matter who we are, as I said before, we can all grow more. We can all become better. We can forgive our friends. I think about you guys living out here. I don't know if I could ever live on a Moshav, because it's very intimate. Everybody knows everything about this one and that one and so on. And God forbid the potential pitfalls of potential lashon hara or whatever. It's horrible. And to be able to really just focus on the love and realize the man who gave his life to build this building, to build this community, to whom you all love and treasure, he's not dead. And he can come to earth. We've learned all of that. It's just a question, looking at like his children. I always remember, my time limited compared to yours, but a few things I remember learning from Reb Shlomo. One of them, we were hanging out at a pizza shop at 11 o'clock at night in New York, and he said, why does God refer to us as B'nai Israel? Because you always have to look at somebody. Remember what they were like when they were 2 years old in the sandbox. Just think of the children. Just think of, we're all just children. And that brings out the kindness. And you forgive when a child spills his food because he's just a kid. So if we do something stupid, we can forgive each other. And we can all help each other. And we can all make this life something where, imagine when we get to the next side, God is greeting us with such joy. So thank you all very, very much.
Yeah.